Mid lane is by far one of the hardest roles to play, both mechanically and macro-wise. So today we're going to be going over 7 different mistakes that low elo mid laners make all the time and how you can fix these mistakes. If you're looking to grind and improve as much as possible, make sure you like the video and subscribe, as well as head over to our website, GameLeap.com, where we have hundreds of guides just like this one designed to help you improve as quickly as possible. Right now, we're even doing a 50% off special, so make sure you don't miss out on that and click the link in the description below today. Now to kick things off with the very first tip, this one's going to be right away at the start of the game. Most mid laners mess up their very first ward, and there are 2 different common wards that you're going to use as a mid laner right away as your first ward. Most mid laners will just randomly throw this ward out either in their side brush, in the pixel brush, or on the enemy raptors. Now this is typically not what you want to do. There are 2 ways that you should be using your ward that are going to help in pretty much all of your games to make sure that the enemy jungler can't do anything. The first one is to counter a level 2 cheese from the enemy jungler. You would place this ward in the pixel brush opposite to where your jungler started. If your jungler started bot side, then make sure that you would put this ward in the top side pixel brush. What this does is it spots out any invades from the enemy jungler. So if the enemy jungler starts their top side, your jungler starts your bot side, then it will prevent the enemy jungler from being able to walk into your top side jungle and take away that second buff. If they do end up invading over this ward, that's completely okay. Then your jungler can trade for their second buff, or you can collapse on them on that second buff and get a kill. This is really good into stuff that is strong early on into the game. Stuff like Lee Sin, Graves, stuff that can easily get level 2 and then invade with that level 2 because they have a lot of power. The second ward would be a ward saved for when the scuttles spawn. Now, what side of the map you put this ward on depends on how strong your level 3 is, or how strong you and the jungler will be when those scuttles spawn. If you are playing something that's really weak early on into the game and you're just looking to get 1 scuttle crab, then it is completely okay to just ward the side of the river that your jungler is going to end on. This allows your jungler to ensure that they can get that crab because you know that the enemy jungler is going to be coming if they do end up coming ahead of time. It allows you to kind of play around that. However, if you're playing something really aggressive in the mid lane and jungle, say Talon and Nidalee, then instead what you can do is ward the opposite side of the jungle that your jungler is going to end on. What this can allow you to do is get that first scuttle uncontested, because you should have lane priority with an aggressive early game, and then rotate to the second scuttle with your jungler, and you'll have vision of that because of the ward that you placed, which will allow you to get the second scuttle. Just to recap, first ward should be used to counter level 2 cheese. If they can't level 2 cheese, then instead it should be used for the scuttle crab to either ensure that you get 1 scuttle crab in games where you have really weak early game, or so that you can get 2 scuttle crabs and really push your early game power in games where you draft a strong early game. This alone can put your jungler so far ahead that you don't really need to do nearly as much as the mid laner. Remember, jungle is super reliant on you early on into the game. The later it goes, the less important it is for you to play around the jungler, but really early on into the game, they can be very fragile. So you need to make sure that you're playing to help them early on. Mistake number 2 is going to be roaming. See, most low elo mid laners don't roam at all, which in and of itself is a mistake, but a lot of higher rated mid laners are just roaming wrong. Either way, you really don't see good roaming happening until Master or even Grandmaster. Remember, there are 3 keys to a successful roam. First, you need to set up a roam timer. Second, you need to make sure that you're roaming over pink wards, or you need to find a way to make sure that you're not roaming over enemy vision. And third, you need to make sure that the lane you're roaming to is actually vulnerable. In order to set up a early roam timer, all you have to do is just shove the wave into the tower. You can either hard push it if you have a lot of wave clear and the enemy laner doesn't, or you can just slow push it, crashing 2 waves into the tower. Creating a roam timer means that even if your roam is unsuccessful, you don't really lose minions for that. Now, the second and third parts of this are going to affect how successful your roam actually is. If you're roaming over vision, then chances are you're not going to get a kill from that roam because that lane's just going to back off because they see you. On the other hand, if you're roaming to a lane that isn't even vulnerable, you might just lose the fight and die even though you have the numbers advantage. In order to circumvent making these mistakes, you want to make sure that you're buying pink wards, buy a sweeper if you need it, make sure that you are tracking enemy summoners and spell usages. This is going to allow you to determine whether or not the enemy bot lane doesn't have flash and heal up. If you're playing Talon, the enemy ADC is Caitlyn, doesn't have flash and heal, you can easily kill that. These two things are absolutely essential, and it's the hardest part about learning how to roam well. You need to make sure you're not going over vision, and you need to make sure that you can actually get a kill. Otherwise, it's really not worth it to go for the roam. Now, it is okay to roam just to make somebody vulnerable, just to blow a flash or an ultimate so that that lane can't play as aggressive. But usually when doing this, you want to set up longer roam timers because it's going to take you a little bit longer to make this play happen. You're not going to get a kill really quickly and then be allowed to walk back to the lane. You're going to be forcing things out from the enemy team, and then they're going to respond, which means it's going to take a little bit longer for you to disengage afterwards. These are a few things that you should try to keep in mind before making your roam happen. That way you can actually get what you want to get from your roam. Next up, you've got the objective game. This is something that is almost always played wrong up until even Diamond. I see mid laners going for too many plates. I see mid laners randomly roaming into the enemy jungle. I see mid laners taxing the first tower EXP. There is a very, very specific way that you want to be playing the macro game as the mid laner. Your number one priority should be farm into EXP. If you can't get farm into EXP, you're going to fall behind. You won't do anything. So you want to make sure that you are catching your waves, and if you are roaming, you're setting up good roam timers. After this point, you want to make sure that you try to get 2 plates from your lane. Going for more than 2 tower plates is actually not a good thing, simply because you don't have time to go for this. It's just not worth it. Most of the time you can't go for a 3rd, 4th, 5th plate unless you're just destroying your lane. And if you are destroying your lane, then a lot of the time it's going to be better for you to go for dragons, rift heralds, go kill the enemy bot lane instead of going for these plates. It'll actually just give you so much more. If you are able to get 2 plates off of your tower before 12 minutes, then you can easily go to the rift herald with your jungler, take it, summon it mid, and get the first tower, which will give you all 5 plates. This is so much better than just hitting the tower over and over and over again. Most of the time as a mid laner, you don't want to be standing there hitting the tower, especially if you've already taken 2 plates. Go do something else. The 4th mistake that most mid laners are making is they tunnel way too hard on farm. I cannot count how many times I have played with or against somebody playing Vladimir, Kassadin, Victor, and all they do is walk mid for the entire game and farm. If it's 20 minutes into the game and you don't have a single KP, you're playing the game wrong. Even on these champions that just love to farm and don't typically like to roam into the enemy jungle, you need to impact the map. So make sure you're taking teleport and you're reacting to plays that happen and you're showing up to plays. In fact, when I play Kassadin, I don't sit in lane and farm. I push and roam into the enemy jungle and I make the enemy jungler's life a living hell. Anytime that I force my mid laner out of the lane, then I go and roam bot lane, try and kill the bot lane. This is a pick that I very heavily roam on whenever I can. Most mid laners, when playing late game champions, all they want to do is farm, but this is just not what you should be doing. You should always be trying to make plays happen around objectives. You want to make sure that you show up to whatever is happening. Don't just AFK farm the mid lane. This is not to say that you should just walk into the enemy jungle, roam on these picks. No, you want to make sure that the enemy team is showing before you do anything. That way you can go, you can get deep vision, you can play much more aggressive, you might have a chance to roam, and it will make a huge difference. If you're just AFK farming for the first 20 minutes of the game has already probably been decided at that point, and unless you can just 1v5 team fights with your mechanical ability and your late game champion, things are not looking good for you. Mistake number 5 is a lot more targeted towards a specific audience, but this is the fact that some mid laners just mess up champion select every game. Listen, if you're a Yasuo one trick or a Zed one trick, you know what, that's fine. play Zed and Yasuo. But if you're somebody who plays more than one champion and you lock in Yasuo or Zed first pick without a care in the world what the rest of your team is hovering, you're not playing champion select right. You need to make sure that your team comp is something salvageable, something that will actually have an opportunity to play the mid game out. So if you're the player who's locking in Yasuo 5th pick while you already have a full AD team, or you lock in Lucian or Tristana mid simply because they have a Kassadin, but you already have a AD top laner and jungler, you need to adjust how you're playing the champion select. Full AD teams are not the end of the world. There are some full AD teams that you can pull off and will work, but you need to make sure that you have some semblance of a team comp. You have a frontliner, you have a support. Try to have some sort of magic damage, some sort of physical damage. There are a lot of team comps that work, and then there's a lot of team comps that absolutely do not work. As a mid laner, you are probably the most important thing when it comes to team comp, simply because lane matchups in the mid lane are so much less important than any other lane. Yes, it sucks to play Kassadin into Talon, but it's doable. In the top lane and in bot lane, there are certain matchups that are just completely unplayable. And sometimes you have to bite the bullet in order to make sure that your team comp is okay, even if it means that your lane matchup won't be ideal. Again, there will be some games where Yasuo or Zed is the pick for that game, but there will also be other games that it is absolutely not the pick. Next up, we've got build efficiency, and this one is absolutely massive. This is probably going to make a huge difference for players that just randomly base and buy whatever is in the recommended. There's two huge problems here. First of all, there are a lot of players who will fully finish items even when they're not efficient. The best example of this is going to be Morellonomicon, but for every champion, it's going to be a little bit different. For example, Echo in the mid lane really likes to take Aether Wisp and their Hextech Revolver because this is going to allow them to kill the wave with one Q after level 7 or level 9. If you build towards a full Proto Belt on Echo, then you won't be able to one-shot the backline with your Q, and that's really, really bad. It means that you can't roam nearly as quickly. You need to commit 3 extra auto attacks, and that takes time. In most matchups, you aren't even allowed to walk up for those auto attacks, which means you have to commit an entire additional Q to clear the wave. Make sure you understand the build and why you're going that build. That way you can be efficient in going about things. If you don't need grievous wounds, don't finish your Morellonomicon. If you're playing an assassin like Zed or Talon, make sure you're itemizing towards that serrated Dirk first. Now the second part of this is all about how you get these items quickly. Obviously, if you want the most power from your champion, you need to hit your power spikes as quickly as possible. The thing that's going to delay those power spikes the most is not having enough gold to buy them. So you want to make sure that when you are going back, you have the gold to buy the item you want. Just because you're a little bit low does not mean that you should go back. If you just need 100 more gold for a serrated Dirk, stay the extra wave, get the serrated Dirk. It's okay to sack priority just for a short amount of time to make sure that you arrive to your power spike in due time. If you're basing too frequently and you're never able to come to your power spikes at the right time, then you're gonna lose a lot of fights that you could have won. If you're playing a mage, you want that lost chapter early on. Assassin, serrated Dirk. Playing a bruiser, you're probably going to rush your boots into some sort of bruiser item. Yes, there are some champions that have very flexible build paths and don't care whatsoever about what items they have on their bases. This is primarily Qiyana and Renekton, but most champions in the mid lane would rather come back to lane with a completed item and just give up 30 seconds of priority, then come back to lane with 2 long swords or with 2 amp tomes. The final mistake that low elo mid laners are making is they have staggered base time. Now, a staggered base timer means that you're in the base when the rest of your team is out on the map trying to do something. This is a concept that's really, really important for bot lane, so I'm going to actually use bot lane to explain it and then show you how it applies to mid lane afterwards. So let's, for example, say that you're playing support. Doesn't matter what support you're playing, you're just playing support, and you need to go back to the base in order to shop or heal or whatever. You end up going back to the base, but the ADC still needs 200 gold before they can get their item, so they stay in lane. You walk back to the lane as support right as the ADC is starting their recall, and then they walk back to the lane as you've been sitting in the lane alone for 30 to 40 seconds. In this scenario, you have been playing in the lane with only one person for about a minute straight, simply because you went back, so the ADC was alone, and then the ADC went back, so you were alone. This gives the enemy bot lane about a minute to capitalize on the fact that there's only one person down there. They can gank with the mid laner or the jungler and make it a 3v1. It makes it very easy for the enemy team to punish things, and it also makes it completely impossible for you to make any plays of your own. So how does this apply to the mid lane? Well, of course, as a mid laner, you're not laning with a support, but your jungler is pretty reliant on you, and you are also reliant on your jungler. Anytime that you want to do an objective as a team, the jungler and the mid laner are typically going to be the first people there. The mid laner is usually the first to respond to anything happening in the jungle simply because they're in the middle of the map and they're able to quickly. However, if you end up staggering your base over and over and over again, it means that if something happens in the mid lane, if you get ganked, the jungler can't react to you being ganked and counter that. And on the other hand, if the enemy jungler invades your jungler, you can't respond because you're in the base. This is a problem that I see all the time, and a lot of mid laners will place the blame on the jungler here. They'll constantly cry for counter ganks. They'll say, oh, the enemy jungler's camping me mid and you're never around, you're always doing this or this or this. If you end up staggering your base timer with the jungler, there's no way that they can help you out. Of course, your jungler can't counter every gank, but if you're never on the same page, they won't be countering any ganks at all. How do we fix this? It's very simple. All we have to do is set up a roam or base timer every time your jungler is close to finishing one side of their jungle. This is going to vastly help the amount of synergy that you have with your jungler, even if you're not on comms. This is because after your jungler finishes doing their Krugs or their Gromp, they're typically going to look for a gank at the side lane, or they're going to look to base. These are by far the most common plays to do after these camps, after finishing their clear. Yes, it's possible that they might do something else, but if you set up a base or a roam timer as they're about to finish their camps, it means that you can arrive to their gank if they decide to go for a gank, or you can base together, which means that you're going to get back on the map at the same time as each other. This means that the amount of downtime that you guys have is as minimal as possible, and you should always be on the same page, which means you should always be playing together. This is typically a concept that's really hard for people to understand and develop, and even diamond players rarely do this. It's really hard to think of the game as a team game as opposed to a solo game. I guarantee there's even master and grandmaster players that don't do this. I know because sometimes I play with them as the jungler and they never show up to anything that I do, and they're always in the base at random times. Most of the time, by the time you get to diamond, you'll at least know that you should base before dragons come up. But aside from that, it's probably not going to happen. And it is something that you can definitely work on, and it will help a lot. If you are in lower elos below diamond, then one thing you can work on is trying to get your whole team to base before the dragon spawns and arriving to the dragon together. This will allow you guys to have a better power spike because you guys got to buy, you guys got to top off your HP, your mana, and the enemy team might not have. Make sure you're doing this plenty in advance and you're arriving to the dragon at least 20 seconds before it spawns. This is typically the number that I go for, but sometimes you're going to have to arrive even earlier. For example, if you're against champions that set up traps like Teemo, Shaco, you might want to arrive 40 seconds beforehand, clear out the waves close to dragon, and then try and sweep out, get some vision in the enemy jungle, etc. The idea here is you want to just try and make sure that you're basing at the same time as the people who are reliant on you. That way you can play off of each other. Start doing this and you'll see more success in your mid-game and early game fights. Of course, this is also important the later the game goes. For example, when you take Baron, sometimes teams will stagger themselves and then they can't really use the Baron. But it's a lot more rare to see this happen. Most players will just group and they won't stagger themselves. Now that is all that I have for you today, 7 mistakes that low elo mid laners are making. If you enjoyed today's video, make sure you smash that like button and subscribe. Right now, over at our website, we're doing a 50% off special. So if you're looking for all of the best content at half the price, Make sure you head over there today. Click the link in the description below. As always, I'm Panther. I hope you learned something valuable, and I will see you in the next one.